Hey there, comic fans. Welcome back. I am Matt K, and today with me I have the ever-loving brown-eyed Cube.
Hello, 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 everyone.
And today is kind of a special occasion. It's been about approximately 1 year since DC Rebirth first hit the comic book stores, and in honor of that, we've decided to do a DC Rebirth roundup, if you will, of just the past year, what's going on with the main Justice Leaguers, any new mysteries coming out, and any lingering mysteries still around.
Definitely. So, to start it off, we're just going to start with the main Justice League, the original 6 or 7 members that you guys may know. We got Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Cyborg. Anyone else? I think that's about it. Yeah,
Do
no?
we say Aquaman? I feel
And
like we
Aquaman.
Aquaman.
Aquaman,
There
right.
we go.
Last but not least, our good king of Atlantis. All right, guys. So to first start off, we're going to start with our boy Superman. So at the beginning of the Rebirth series, we see the original New 52 Superman, the one that is kind of native to this universe, die. He is killed by a man who accidentally absorbs some of his powers, some of Superman's powers, and to kind of save people and stop the man from killing anyone, that new 52 Superman is forced to kind of absorb it, and he is turned to dust immediately afterwards, leaving.
What? Oh yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Oh, I was just gonna say, continuing on from that. Luckily, we had the post Infinite Crisis Superman around to kind of take up the reins back in this universe, kind of secretly hiding, and that's been our current Superman since then. I would argue, I don't know about you, Q, but he personally, out of the entire Justice League, has had like the biggest changes just in his status quo, from going from a dad to back to being Superman, and then until finally, as we learned in Superman Reborn, that he was actually one half of a whole Superman that included the New 52. It gets super complicated, but it
Basically, he embodies several different Superman from several different comics that we've seen in the past almost 10, 15 years. Like there's he is the literal embodiment of Blue Superman, the Blue Lightning one. He's had several incarnations as like almost like a future Superman. There was a whole issue dedicated towards his past, leading up from his rebirth, his death from Doomsday, up until now with his wife Lois and his son John.
I think what's important is that we've actually seen that his Silver Age stories are still intact. All those stories that we've gotten to know and love are still intact, and they're actually a part of this universe now. They were integrated into this universe. So it's like he's always been around, and no one really remembers that these two Supermen were separate, but that there's always been one continuous Superman since the beginning.
Yeah, so it's getting pretty intense because if he is actually the Superman from that era, he embodies a Superman almost of like Silver Age levels of strength. He's shown us quite a lot of feats that not many of the new Supermen we've seen in comics are able to do. And branching off from him, we've had a lot of interesting little comics based around his family and his son John and where he's been doing and how he's been almost growing up on a farm that Superman and Lois decided was the best choice for him to kind of hone his powers, and we've met a lot of characters around him because of that.
Yeah, definitely. And we've also seen Superman's adventures escalate as well. It seems like him, along with another character who we'll talk about later, is the kind of the forefront of DC Rebirth. And it's just been amazing kind of to see him fight against all these crazy new threats like Prophecy, who was taking down all the Superman across all the different multiverses, and the mysterious threat of Mr. Oz, who is one of those lingering mysteries we were referring to. We still have no clue who this guy is, but he's been watching over Superman, it seems, for a very long time.
He's been pulling the cords for quite some time. We see him kind of like puppeteering a lot of people, playing like kind of mixing and matching minds and pulling people straight out of where they are. He's done it with Doomsday. He's done it with actually Prophecy. Now that you mention him, we've seen that whoever Mr. Oz is, he's definitely a man of considerable power because he can hold Mixelplex. That's happened in one of the Action Comics. That's where we also find out about the whole New 52, the deja vu moment that Mixelplex mentions. It's quite interesting. Basically, Mr. Oz is one of these overarching characters in Superman's life and everybody else's life that's not really explained yet. And we've had a whole year. We've had a whole year of seeing him do things, and we just don't know who he is.
Exactly. Now, from here, let's move on to Batman, who personally I feel like not much has changed since his New 52 relaunch. He kind of is the same character. They've made it seem like he's been around a lot longer than the New 52, that's for sure. And he suffered some changes like Tim Drake, as we were saying, was also taken by Mr. Oz for digging a little too deep. And what his purpose is with Mr. Oz, we still have no clue yet. But other than that, it's pretty much the same old Batman kind of doing his thing. We have Nightwing also now back in Bloodhaven, but still kind of fairly young compared to his previous version. And same with the rest of his family.
Going through all of these comics for Batman has actually been really interesting thinking back on it now. Remember at the beginning we had like Night of the Monster Men, where Strange was turning people into monsters with like Psycho Pirate, and we've had Nightwing deal with an almost pregnancy. We've seen Damian Wayne deal with, or like basically become friends with Robin and take over, not even take over the Titans, but kind of lead the Titans now, or the Teen Titans in particular. Titans is a branch for Nightwing and Flash and several other little characters. It's just kind of hard to like differentiate because one's literally just Teen Titans and the other one is Titans. But besides that, we've seen the Bat family stretch far and wide. We've seen Spoiler again. We've seen Orphan. We've seen lots of recurring characters from the past New 52 things kind of make their way back into the comics now and be a part of Batman's life, whether he likes it or not.
Exactly. Like Batwing was a New 52 creation, and he's still around. We're still seeing a lot of him in Detective Comics. And Batwoman, who was introduced before the New 52, is also back as well, showing us that the Bat family has kind of grown a lot more since when it first started off those many years ago. There is one thing that has it's just introduced, and it started with DC Rebirth, that's about to be uh, covered in the next issue, which is the War of Joke and Riddles, which I noticed in Tom King's run has been referenced numerous times as a past event that happened in the Batman universe that we haven't really seen yet. There's been repercussions from it, but we didn't really actually get to see the event. But I know in this coming week's Batman, where it's going to be the start of the prelude of the War of Joke and Riddles, which is a war between the Joker and the Riddler that happened in Gotham.
Okay, and another big important thing now that you mention it right there is the Joker. So, for those of you who haven't been keeping up with Rebirth, at the beginning of Rebirth, we see that there are three Jokers all alive in Gotham, and they're all making mayhem everywhere they go. So, Batman is trying to figure out who they are, and then if you guys have read even one of the Harley Quinn comics, a Joker shows up there who is not one of the three and is immediately killed by Harley Quinn, which was kind of lackluster, but it was just funny to see because I thought this was going to be a big important deal. It's one of the Jokers showing up in one of the comics finally. We haven't seen any hint of him besides there and kind of like a little bit here in Batman Beyond, which doesn't really make much of a difference because that takes place so far in the future. Or maybe it does, I don't know. But we see that like all these Jokers are like now like with this next comic coming out, we're going to start getting some origin to at least one of them. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
It's kind of interesting you brought that up. I honestly had forgotten about that whole big mystery, but yeah, that's a huge deal. I mean, this whole time we're thinking it's always been Batman and the Joker, but it turns out it's been Batman and the Jokers. I mean, there's two other people that have taken on the Joker identity. I mean, meaning that at least three people kind of had the same mindset and became this crazy, unstoppable force against Batman, and we still have no clue who any of them are.
A whole year's worth of work, and we still don't know anything about any three of them. So it's still pretty intense. There's still a lot left to ponder for Batman. But like moving on from him and moving on from Damian and all the Robins and Nightwing, we're gonna move on to Flash because Flash has held like a kind of important moment in between all of these characters because the original Flash, Barry Allen, is supposedly one of the reasons that DC Rebirth is kind of happening.
Yeah, it all actually started, if you think back, it all started way back when Flashpoint first hit, and Barry Allen, through just time travel shenanigans, actually managed to create the New 52 universe. And since then, he's always been kind of connected to these weird, like multiverse trips. He first died in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and now he's here doing even more. and it seems like he's connected with the Speed Force into the change. And we saw that one of his closest allies, who's been missing since the New 52, Wally West, actually came back at the start of DC Rebirth. So these two Flashes definitely play an important role into this whole grand event. I don't even know what you would even call this giant thing, but they definitely play a part in this.
So you're definitely right, and what I'm worried about is that we're like how all the other speedsters are involved, because we see that, or Wally West makes note at the very beginning of Rebirth. He says that Flashpoint has something to do with this. That when Barry saved his mom, something noticed that change in reality and reached through and did something, and it caused a tear, or it caused a time shift, and there's like 15 years for everyone that has been altered, and the entire reality of 15 years has changed, and it's really messed with a lot of the characters, but the speedsters in particular, because now a bunch of them are missing.
Exactly, and we actually got to see one of our missing speedsters a couple weeks ago in the Flash comic, Flash 22, to be exact. We saw the missing Jay Garrick, who has always had very close ties to the Justice Society, being a member, and it's kind of interesting because we see that he's been trapped in the Speed Force by someone, and we will get to who we think that is, but for the most part, it seems like a lot of the multiverse kind of shenanigans that this person has been messing with has to do with time, and that's why the Flashes, I feel in my case, are deeply connected since they have their ability to travel through time.
That's probably right, but for all we know, it could be the exact opposite of why he's messing with them. But for now, we're gonna continue and just like look through what's happened with all the Flashes. So Barry Allen, he's been dealing with his nephew Wally West, and
In
his
some kind of weird way, they're all related. That's all I
yeah,
know.
yeah. So we have Wallace West, who is the new Flash, who dresses as Kid Flash in the yellow and red. We have Wally West, who was pulled from the Speed Force by Barry Allen, who now exists and who did not disappear. And he is wearing a new costume for himself, which is kind of like his old Flash costume, but without the top. So it has his long flowing red mane comes out of it, which looks. I think the new costume looks great on him. It kind of suits him. It's a little cocky, and I feel like that makes sense for our boy Wally.
Exactly. I like his lightning when he runs. I like how it's some kind of weird mixture of white and blue. I think that was a nice touch.
And then we get to, besides them, we have, I think that's about it in terms of speedsters, but in terms of villain speedsters, we have Eobard Thawne, who is Zoom. And this Zoom in particular, who is in Blackgate, or is that the jail that is by the Flash's city? I always
It
seem to
is,
forget it. It
yeah.
is? Okay. So that Flash particular has been around since Flashpoint, and he has seen the altering reality, and he knows something's going on, and he has he has Barry Allen levels of Speed Force power. So it's kind of scary to think what he could have done with it compared to what happened to him in one of the major playing comics that is happening with DC right now, the Button that just passed, and that is also where Jay Garrick is revealed.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. For those of you, in case you didn't read the whole Button crossover that happened a couple weeks back, the Reverse Flash, who actually died in the event Flashpoint, managed to come back and be a thorn in Batman and Flash's side as they're investigating the Button. And it's amazing because the first issue he comes back, he also dies after seeing what he says in his words was God. And it was kind of interesting. I was expecting a lot more from him when he came back, but at the same time it's also kind of haunting that someone as dangerous as the Reverse Flash was taken down so, just like that, like nothing.
Someone who can like almost alter reality on a whim was just beaten in a moment, and as the Button comic continues, you see why, and we actually catch him in the middle of the Speed Force before and after his death, which is pretty intense. They use that kind of like timeline thing with the Speed Force really well in the Button. I'd recommend it. But moving on from the Flashes, we're gonna get to Aquaman, who has been trying to essentially this entire time defend his own kingdom. but like he doesn't essentially have the entire backing of Atlantis behind him because at the very beginning of Rebirth, he is going against America, who deems Atlantis as a threat.
One thing I do have to say, I liked what DC Rebirth brought to the table was I really like what they did to Aquaman's costume. I did enjoy the new 52 costume. I thought it was fantastic, but I think this one really it kind of gives you that whole vibe of the Silver Age Aquaman. And I like the Silver Age Aquaman, despite the jokes people throw against him. I think he's a great character. And I just think it was nice to see him get back to his roots more as a king rather than a superhero.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that Wally West actually makes it a point out to say when he's traveling and seeing all of his different friends in different areas is he sees that Aquaman and Mira are just getting married. So this timeline in particular, or this kind of universe in particular, they haven't been married for so long already. They haven't been together for so long already. This is just like the budding of their relationship at the beginning of Rebirth and their marriage, and now like as we make our through Arthur dealing with Atlantis, Arthur dealing with Black Manta, Arthur dealing with the Aquamarines, which is like this crazy marine troop made by the military. We see that Aquaman is trying to maintain this relationship with Mira, and she's having a hard time dealing with it as well because she's getting like prophecies from people from Atlantis saying that don't get with him. You're gonna ruin Atlantis if you get with him. It's getting pretty intense, like between their relationship. It's not something I expected to see, or that strain at least.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. One thing I did notice with Aquaman when DC Rebirth started was kind of like Batman. They didn't get rid of too much of his New 52 history. They kind of kept a lot of it around. And I'm kind of happy. I know DC is definitely trying to make Aquaman seem like more of an actiony kind of a real character instead of the joke character everybody always makes him out to be.
And seeing him deal with Atlantis is definitely giving me that vibe because we're not seeing him as just a member of the Justice League. We're watching him deal with the daily happenings of Atlantis. Like there's a social cast and a social tier list in Atlantis that he's constantly having to deal with. He's dealing with like advising his chief members and all the people around him in his council. And in the recent comics, they're all standing against him now, which is not something I'd expect. But he's determined to fight for his throne, which is awesome. I love to see this like inner struggle, almost got like a Game of Thrones kind of vibe, where he's just dealing with all of this.
Exactly. Now, from here, let's move on to the Green Lanterns. And yeah, I do say that plural because there has been a lot of new additions to the Green Lanterns since the New 52. And one thing I noticed is they're really kind of pushing this whole sense of unity with the corpse. We see that we have four of our Earth Lanterns up in space and two of them down on Earth. And they're not afraid to really push the more space side of things for the Green Lanterns, which I'm really enjoying. It's been a lot of the same things. Just like when it shifted over to the New 52 universe, there wasn't much change for the Green Lanterns. And once again, there isn't a lot of change. They're just kind of continuing on from their stories, which makes sense because the stories were good. It's just they have small changes. Like now we see the Green Lanterns are now incorporated with the Yellow Lanterns, which I think is a really neat concept.
It is. It really is to see that concept happening like right before our eyes, seeing the fear and the will work together. It's not something that we expected, but at the beginning of Rebirth, we see that all the Green Lanterns are assaulting, or they just managed to get back to Oa, or they so the Green Lanterns have just moved Oa into back to where it was, and they've just managed to defeat the Yellow Lanterns, but not even defeat. There's only one lantern in particular that needed defeating at the beginning of Rebirth, and it was Sinestro. And Hal Jordan does that single-handedly. He almost defeats the entire Yellow Lantern Corps by himself off pure will.
Oh, that was fantastic. Those are the fantastic opening issues. I mean, just the whole fight between Hal and Sinestro was just really well done. I mean, you could really see that these two were old hated rivals and at sometimes friends, and it just finally boiled down to it. And what we saw was these two actually going out in a big bang. Literally, they blow up the planet, they blow up a war world they're on, and from here it actually becomes a little bit of a rebirth story as we see Hal Jordan in what was it, Emerald Space, I believe, some kind of
Emerald
weird.
Space, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like the space, the hereafter for Green Lanterns. We see Abin Sur there. We see a lot of the deceased characters actually from like past comics, which is really nice. We see besides Ebon Sur, I think we see oh, what's her name? The girl, one of the younger lanterns, her father was there. We see the Finned people who also have beaks. I always forget their race name, but they're there as well. There's a lot of old lanterns in the Emerald space, and it's actually really interesting to know that there's a hereafter for Green Lanterns because Hal Jordan was not allowed to stay, as we saw through Rebirth.
Yeah, he has done a lot of interesting things since Rebirth has started, including creating his own power ring out of will, which is the first. He's the first Lantern that I've ever done that before, and escaping Emerald Space as another thing. But despite the book being called Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns, he's actually not the Green Lantern to lead the Corps. In fact, it's John Stewart, who I know is your personal favorite Lantern Cube, and
Yeah, yeah.
I'm enjoying the direction they're bringing with him. I really like him as leader.
He's actually leading. He doesn't leave Oa anymore. Like he doesn't go out and do missions. He's forced to stay on Oa and lead the Corps, and it's kind of limiting him. And not that I like that in that sense, but I like how angry he's getting because we see that John isn't the kind of guy to sit back and like take things. He's in action. He's a front forward kind of guy. So when they put him at this position of power where he can't do anything, he's restless basically, and I really enjoy that out of him. I like the idea that he's always itching for a fight, even though he's so level-headed most of the time. But it's not just him either. We see Guy Gardner's there. We see Kyle Rayner, and they've been doing their own things. We actually see Guy Gardner get into a fist fight with a Yellow Lantern, who they both agree to take off their rings to fight, and it's amazing. It's so violent and over the top, but it's perfect for a character like Guy.
Oh yeah, when he fights Krillo, that was really rad. That was a lot more bloody than I would have thought they would be willing to put in a comic. You know, I was really shocked about the amount of blood that went into that fist fight, but it was fantastic. It showed Guy less as like a joke character, but more, he's a tough guy. He can be taken seriously too sometimes. He kind of reminds me of like a character from Gurren Lagann. I don't expect anyone to get that reference, but you know, just
The
really
the
over the top.
willpower, yeah, the willpower just flows off of him. It's not that he has to force it. It's just something that he is. He's just always got that fire in him, and that's what lets him use the ring.
Meanwhile, back on Earth in the main Green Lanterns book, we have two new lanterns that were introduced in the New 52, Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, working as partners to guard the Sector 2814, and just basically dealing with Earth threats.
It's actually really cool because if you guys have read any of the Green Lantern comics with between them two at all, it's interesting to see them grow as characters. We see them at first like Jessica is hardly able to manifest any sort of figure out of will. She can hardly do anything with the ring besides fly, and Simon just he doesn't do it effortlessly, but most of his creations are things that he deals with in real life. Like he makes a truck, he makes a gun, he makes like he doesn't normally have any like that creative of a design, but it still manages to get him through fights. And as we get through the comic, we see that both of them are starting to grow and be able to use their rings more efficiently. We see them deal with Raimi, which is one of the original Guardians of Oa. We see them deal with the original Lantern. We see them deal with a new ring that allows the a person to control the entire emotional spectrum at once, which is called the Phantom Ring. And it's actually really intense because this ring isn't being able to be held by most people because it just fucks with your emotions so intensely. And then they eventually in the newest stuff in the newest Green Lantern comics they make it back to they're forced to come back and basically compete in a boot camp for lanterns.
Now, before we move on, I kind of forgot. Is it Oa or is it Mogo? Because I forget if Oa
Oh
got
no, I think
restored.
yeah, you're right. I think Mogo is now the new. Is it? Is Mogo the new home base for lanterns?
I think Mogo is the new home base for Lanterns. That's what
I'm sorry if I've been
last
getting
time I
that
checked.
wrong.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was actually a little confused on that too. It's been a while, but yeah, yeah. So they're all on Mogo now, which is kind of neat. I like that their planet, their base, their HQ is
Is a
actually a
lantern.
living planet. That's really neat.
In the entire, besides just the main lanterns, I want to make it a point to say we've seen a lot of interesting new lantern characters, not just green but yellow as well. We've seen the Prince Gorilla, who is a lantern. We've seen
Oh yeah,
the
yeah. What was his name? He had a specific
He had a
name.
very specific name that if you say it, you insult him. That it was just like knowing his true name is insulting to him.
Oh yeah, he is a fantastic character. He is like personally I like him the most out of every new Yellow Lantern we've seen. He's been the best.
And one little side story I forgot to mention is that we see one of the Brainiacs is controlled by the Orange Lantern, Larfleeze. And when Larfleeze controls the Brainiac, he forces him to put the entirety of the Yellow and Green Lantern Corps into a city, like Brainiac normally does. And in that, we see the lanterns have to work together. And one of my favorite lanterns that we get to see out of that is like a cockroach kind of lantern, or not. I'm not exactly sure what his race is, but he has like kind of the upper torso of like a cockroach, and since that, I guess he can hear really well. So we see him use his lantern to play, or his ring to play music or a specific note that shatters the city. And I thought that was such an interesting and new way to use the ring. Like, it's not just the humans using the ring in different ways, it's everybody can use the ring in their own particular way.
I remember that. I remember that he also came up with his own unique oath for the Green Lantern, the whole Green Lantern oath, and I thought that was amazing at the time. That was the coolest thing I had ever seen, just because it shows that it's not just the singular oath. You know, people adapt it for various reasons, and that was a really cool concept they introduced.
Also in that comic, although not playing a big part, we see New 52 Lobo, don't we? I think.
That's
We
right, yeah. Kind of another. I think it was more of a writer's and artist joke of showing that, New 52 is done. Here's what happens to certain characters that appeared and are now kind of being forgotten.
Yeah, he seems to be in prison with the lanterns now, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you there. I mean, I didn't like him very much. I'm glad we have the new Lobo back, or the new Lobo, the original Lobo back, I should say.
Speaking of the new Lobo, we can start moving on to some of the other characters. So next, I think we should address is Wonder Woman, who has actually had quite a turbulent beginning since the beginning of Rebirth, just in terms of her character, not design, her character aspects. She's been going crazy because she hasn't been able to return to Themyscira since the beginning of Rebirth, and she doesn't understand why. And we actually just found out why at the beginning of this newest Wonder Woman comic.
I actually really like what they're doing with Wonder Woman, and I also kind of really hate it at the same time. It's a love-hate relationship with it. I like it simply for the fact that they acknowledge the New 52. They acknowledge her New 52 origins, and they're kind of saying, okay, none of that stuff was really real, and it's a smart way to get rid of her past origin and introduce a new one. And the thought that she hasn't been in Themyscira since she left was actually it was a chilling idea. But at the same time, throughout the years, they've changed her origins so much. It's kind of hard to get a grasp on who Wonder Woman is. And if you really want to like kind of build a character, you really got to make a solid origin for them. I mean, we all know Superman comes from Krypton. We all know Batman lost his parents. We all know Spider-Man, his Uncle Ben got shot. And if you ask anyone what Wonder Woman's origin is, you can't really give a specific thing. You just know she's from an island of Amazons and she came to protect, the world. And it's kind of hard to get a fine detail down on it. And by changing it again, once again, you're kind of just alienating fans from what her true origin could possibly be.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. One thing that kind of like confused me always with the Wonder Woman story is that normally whenever I see the Wonder Woman origin and she leaves Themyscira, her mother says that she probably won't be able to come back. That it's always a possibility that Wonder Woman may never make it back to Themyscira, and I feel like this is one of the times they've actually kind of held true to that, where Wonder Woman is forced to kind of give up her home to stay with the open world. And in the new comic, we find out why. Essentially, Ares, her with a Greek god of war, was chained and put beneath Themyscira, and nobody is allowed to return to Themyscira because finding Themyscira means finding Ares' cell. And it's been a really big problem with Ares because he is so violent and not level-headed in the original stuff that they had to literally hold him beneath the city, and the Amazonians were forced to keep her there, or to keep him there. And now we see that his sons are trying to get him out, and Wonder Woman is forced to defend Themyscira and still not make it back. Like the whole ending scene of this comic is her and her mother leaning against either side of essentially what is Ares' cell and not being able to see each other still. It's a sad ending, and we don't know what's going to happen with Wonder Woman now that she knows that Themyscira will probably never be available to her.
Well, seeing how I haven't read that comic yet, that actually sounds very depressing. I'm probably gonna go read that right after this. But another thing they added to Wonder Woman is they updated her whole costume, her superhero wardrobe, and I gotta say it does look a lot like the movie version that's coming out next week. But I think it looks great. I think for once they actually really nailed the Wonder Woman design with this new costume.
I like it a lot too. But actually, one of the things that we kind of failed to mention at first at the beginning of this is that Wonder Woman was in an insane asylum for just a little while. For a small moment, she went crazy enough that she was put in an insane asylum until the patrons of the gods, which is essentially the animals that follow the 12 gods of Olympus, came and visited her and made her kind of realize who she was.
That's right, yeah. So that's part of her canon now. She was crazy for a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
from from here, who's next? Who are we missing? Got Flash, Green Lantern. Yeah, we could talk about Cyborg since he's now, I guess, one of the big League members. I personally, not much has changed with Cyborg, other than the fact he's still part of the League. Um, I don't know, Cube. You have anything you want to add?
He's had some interesting fights that have kind of made him. Well, at the beginning, it was very interesting because we're still seeing, even though that Cyborg has been what he is now for quite. I think it's been quite a few years at this point. He's still having a hard time dealing with his humanity, dealing with the side of him that's half human and half robot. That's kind of constantly at battle for him. And at the beginning of the DC Rebirth kind of stuff for him, we see him experiencing music, which was a little weird. We see him go to like a jazz club and kind of enjoy that, and I feel like that was a little off for the character, but whatever. And then we see him fight Kilgore, I think was his name, who was a full cyborg who believes that Victor is kind of not putting his best foot forward, so he wants him to go full cyborg and take away the human side, and that was a whole little arc. But besides that, we haven't seen much like change for Cyborg in terms of the Rebirth kind of backstory. He's still just kind of dealing with what he is and helping the Justice League out. And I got to admit, he's a pretty useful member despite everything. He's really good at maintaining the Watchtower and all those things that require technology to use, which is pretty much damn near everything he's maintained for them.
Now, see, in my opinion, I feel like DC Rebirth would have been a perfect chance to kind of add something a little bit more to Cyborg. I mean, he's like I said before, he's kind of the same character as he was in the New 52, and I do agree with you. He does add a lot to the Justice League. He's their personal teleporter. He maintains all the tech on the Watchtower, but I feel like that's all he is. I'm a huge fan of the Martian Manhunter. I love the character, and I was really disappointed when I found out they were kind of rewriting the origins so he was no longer like one of the founding members of the Justice League. And I I just feel like he doesn't have as much character as the Martian Manhunter. He doesn't have as much to add to a fight. Usually whenever the Justice League is fighting, it's usually Cyborg's the one who's getting injured, something breaks off because it's easily fixable. So it kind of is a writer's way of showing like, hey, he's injured, so it's a lot more serious than we think, and then he comes back just because it's a robot body, so he's able to fix it. But yeah, I was hoping for a little bit more, but other than that, DC Rebirth has just been fantastic with all the other character evolutions as we've seen.
And the ones we haven't seen, because we're still lingering on quite a few characters, quite a few mentions early on in the DC Rebirth stuff that we haven't gotten any kind of action from. But like with just to round off the Cyborg thing, I don't want to say this as an insult to Cyborg, but he's kind of becoming an overglorified mother box, where he's just kind of like there to offer information and take them where they need to go. And but the thing is, since the Cyborg, it's a sassy mother box.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he has the potential. He definitely has the potential. I mean, just you just got to do something with him. I honestly don't even know how you can fix Cyborg. That might be a good video idea now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, so from here, let's jump to the mysteries that are left to be solved still. And we were talking about it earlier, but let's start off with the Justice Society, who have been missing since the start of the New 52. There was that Earth 2 book that was published, but that was showing more of a younger Justice Society that wasn't based on the current Earth, but a separate Earth altogether. So that doesn't really count. I'm talking about the old timers, the Jay Garrick, the Alan Scott, the Wildcat. They have not shown up at all for at least, I want to say, 7 or 8 years now.
And the thing about it too now is that with at the very beginning of Rebirth, we've technically only seen two members of this team. Three now. If you've read the new Blue Beetle, you would see that we've seen Mr. Kent, Mr. or Dr. Fate, if I will. But he is just introduced, and for some weird reason, he is being kept in a coffin inside the Tower of Fate, and we have no idea why. But besides him, at the very beginning of Rebirth, we see Mr. Thunder, Johnny,
Johnny Thunder,
who has a genie, and Wally West, while he is being dragged through the Speed Force, tries to contact Mr. Thunder and is like, "Call the genie, get the Justice Society back together." He's warning him, and the thing is, Mr. Thunder actually knows like something about what he's talking about. He mentions that all these little moments that we have no prelude or no idea of. He's like, "I'm sorry we did this. There was this whole moment back in a previous thing that we have no idea about that the Justice Society had to deal with, and we have literally no image of." Like he's just so startled by the memory of it. It's driving him crazy. And now that Wally West shows up, it kind of confirms his suspicions that something's wrong, but he's in a mental hospital, so he can't do anything.
I think that was one of the greatest scenes is when I'm not sure if it was a mental hospital or if it was just an old folks home. They were kind of treating him like he was a mental patient though. But when he's calling out for his genie Thunderbolt, and it's like a raining scene and there's storming clouds, and he's saying the magical word "see you," and it's not summoning his genie, and we just see him in total despair because despite everything, he is just an old man, and without his genie, he's basically useless.
And what's really sad is that he sees Wally West, and Wally West is trying to warn him, and he believes that Wally West is the genie. I think like right at the end, because as Wally West disappears, he starts screaming it again, see you," hoping that Wally West will come back, and he just never does.
Oh yeah, that was really depressing. But
Yeah,
no,
I just was gonna take it back around. So the only three members we've seen are him, Jay Garrick, who is possibly dead. So just going back to mention the button one more time, we see Jay Garrick is in it, and he saves the Flash and Batman. But at the end of the comic, he literally is like not eviscerated. We just don't even know. He is hit by a bolt of power, and it sends him out of the Batcave, and we don't know where he went. And then finally we have Mr. Kent, who is Dr. Fate, and usually where we've seen him most recently is in the Blue Beetle comic. And it's actually funny to mention that, because the Blue Beetle, we'll talk about it a little later on. A lot of people have had their past, kind of rewritten, and Blue Beetle is kind of one of them. Because I think it's in the New 52, he decided after having a heart attack he wasn't going to continue in the hero business, unlike in the original universe where he dies because of it.
and let's just jump into it. But that's another thing we've been noticing is this whole universe. It's still technically, if you think about it, the New 52 universe, but someone has definitely been messing with it, and like Cube has said, stole time from the universe. Where once there was 15 years had passed in this universe, now there had only been 5, and we're slowly starting to see the timeline unravel. Clearly, 15 years have passed since Superman has a 10-year-old son, which, I mean, that had to happen sometime. So it's just been the result of someone messing with the timeline and people losing their memory of their 10 years. So should we just jump into who we think is the big bad? I mean, I'm pretty sure all you guys who are listening know about who it is. I mean, you've seen the spoilers, you've seen kind of like the little hints.
We've aired our thoughts once or twice before.
Exactly. So at the end of the button, at the end of Flash 22, we saw a very, very familiar blue hand picking up the comedian's button. The comedian is from the Watchmen universe, and with a very specific quote from the Watchmen comic book, and it appears that Dr. Manhattan might be the cause of all these weird timeline shifts in the DC universe.
So with Manhattan, we see him pick up the button, and at the beginning of Rebirth, we didn't have really much of an inkling as to who it was. We kind of assumed it was Manhattan because the Watchmen universe always gives way to him, but there's a lot of other characters that were as equally bad, maybe not as powerful, because we have Ozymandias, and he was a bad guy. Let's face it, whether we like it or not. Well, judging by your opinion of what he did, if you guys have read Watchmen. But at the beginning of Rebirth, we see besides the button, there's one other little scene that we see at the end of the opening Rebirth comic, and it's a watch, and it's a broken watch on Mars, and it hovers into space, and then it's broken apart, and then all the parts are fixed and put back together, and then we see the time on the clock, and then it cuts to a doomsday clock, of very similar Watchmen doomsday clock. So that watch being fixed obviously leads to the powers of Captain Manhattan, or Dr. Manhattan, I'm sorry. But we don't know why he's doing these things. We have no inkling or any idea as to why he's messed with the timeline in between Flashpoint and now. And we're still questioning why, because we see Mr. Oz, who has something to do with all of this. We don't know what, but he is collecting people who have gotten too close to some sort of truth, and now I'm afraid that it's the Watchmen truth, where Manhattan is messing with the universe.
And there's a lot of reasons why it couldn't be Manhattan, simply because he's such a neutral character, and he's never really been one to do anything like explicitly evil. But Jeff Johns, when talking about the upcoming miniseries Doomsday Clock, has stated that it will be Superman's first time coming and meeting damn it, now I'm saying it. Dr. Manhattan.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
It is fine. It's going to be his first time engaging and meeting Dr. Manhattan. So whether or not he's the big villain of DC Rebirth, because I feel there's something else going on here. It has to be a little more complicated than just Dr. Manhattan being the big bad. I feel that he is involved deeply in this, and we're going to be seeing that in November.
Yeah, and with that, I just want to cut to just who not who Mr. Oz is, but just any idea of what it could be, because we see him, as we mentioned before, we see him collect Doomsday, we see him collect a prophecy, but we also learn that he collected Mxyzptlk, who is a character who has altering reality powers just like Manhattan, and we see he collects Tim Drake, one of the many adopted sons of Batman. So with Tim Drake, it's such a weird character to see disappear, because we see him literally erased from existence. Because if you guys didn't know, he did a little stint in Batman Beyond where he was Batman in the future because he was sent to the future, and we see at the end of his kind of run as Batman Beyond, he disappears from the future as well, which means that his existence, literally past and present, is gone. Somebody has literally pulled him out of their timeline or universe or whatever it may be and has placed him in Mr. Oz's prison.
And if this is the case, and Mr. Oz is Ozymandias, this is clearly above his power grade. I mean, he was just a normal man. He was the world's smartest man, but he wasn't able to pull fifth dimensional beings out of their place and keep them locked up. So once again, there's definitely some kind of, either he's being powered by Dr. Manhattan, or he's against him, because he does seem to be helping Superman in some weird way. I don't know. Sometimes he's helping him, sometimes he's against him. It's a little odd to what his true intentions are.
Yeah, but yet again, just covering everything and going back to what it was, or going back over everything, when Eobard Thawne channels the the Speed Force through the button, or not channels it, but uses the Speed Force to go to the location of where the button kind of came from. He ends up in the middle of nowhere. If you remember, he ends up on like this little like plateau in the middle of nowhere, and he's like talking to the button because he feels the power coming off of it. And in that moment, he sees whatever it may be, Manhattan or otherwise, and he is so scared by it, and it immediately kills him. So we don't know because, Manhattan has killed for the necessity of killing. Like, whether you guys like have read it or not, there's scenes in Watchmen where he's forced to kill and he has no choice. Or, well, he could have done anything, but I guess he assumes that killing is the easiest and safest solution. So him killing Thawne, making that decision, either proves that Thawne was a threat to what he was doing or something along those lines.
Now, just taking a step back from DC Rebirth, from all this really heavy comic book lingo, I think as a whole, this DC Rebirth, I guess you could call it a relaunch, soft reboot, whatever you guys want to call it. I feel like it's been a success. DC decided to stop reissuing issues after a certain amount of period, stop doing the new number ones, kind of like Marvel is stuck doing, and they decided to focus on the meat and potatoes, just the general characters and their stories and what makes them good in the first place. And since then, we actually haven't seen many cancellations, if any at all. I don't know. Do you even know one that's been canceled, Cube?
I can't think of any at the moment, but like going like at the same in that same sort of thought process, we at the beginning of Rebirth, we saw a lot of characters kind of around for Superman's death, or the original Superman's death of this universe. We see Shazam there. I think we see Supergirl there, who's also had her own kind of like comic book run, but we don't like see a lot of characters, and it's actually, or we don't see a lot of characters getting in their own series at the moment, and even the ones we saw in that moment in particular. So I'm still holding out for a Shazam comic. I'm believing it's out there.
Shazam will definitely get his day. Um, that's another thing. They're very selective with what characters they give their comics. I mean, we have seen that some of the weirder characters get imprinted in DC's Young Animal, which personally I think is fantastic. I know you have also been enjoying it as well.
Yeah, it hasn't had much to do with what's going on with the whole Rebirth as a whole, but we've seen Doom Patrol come back. We've seen Shade the Changing Girl, who is a new character kind of adopting Shade's place. We're just getting a comic called Bug, which is about Forager, a New God character who Tom King is also writing, if I remember correctly.
I think Tom King is doing a New Gods series. I think it's still. I want to say Gerard Way. I could be off on that though.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, like that. There is a New Gods kind of thing coming up besides Young Animal.
Yeah, so they're really expanding. They're kind of expanding some of the corners that we didn't really get to see in New 52, and showing that the DC Rebirth, or this whole Rebirth for DC, is kind of bringing back a lot of the old characters we cared about, and still expanding on the new ones. It's just kind of intertwining what we liked about New 52 and what we really liked about the characters before New 52, and just bringing it all back in, a rebirth.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying it for the most part. There have been, it's kind of misstepped here and there. Hasn't been the best comics. Like if you guys have actually read the Justice League comic, we're still getting a lot of things that we don't know about. It's a lot of like things trying to attack Earth or saying that Earth is kind of being altered in some way, and the Justice League just doesn't know what to do. All they think is that there's a threat coming and they have to prepare for it.
Yeah, that one's still kind of a mystery, honestly.
And I'm not saying that the comic is bad. I'm just saying that without any context to what these things are that are attacking Earth or trying to prepare for whatever is attacking by going to Earth, it still hasn't give us any answers.
Yeah, I remember when I was caught up, that seemed like the case. But other than that, I mean, oh, before we exit, there was one little niche of the DC universe that we haven't talked about, and that's the Legion of Superheroes.
The future Justice League, if you will, a group of not even kids, but what would seem to be teenagers, almost like the Teen Titans, defending the future of the DC universe, and we haven't seen anything from them besides one character, which is Saturn Girl.
Yeah, and she is trapped currently in Arkham Asylum, only stating in the recent button crossover, as everything seems to be leading from that, that the death of a hockey player started a kind of like a chain reaction that ended up leading to the end of the Legion of Superheroes. And that is probably the biggest mystery because, like the Justice Society, we've seen Jay Garrick appear. We have Johnny Thunder, and they've given us very small tidbits of information. But the Legion is we have no clue what's going on.
They're like gone, and that's actually really interesting to know because whatever or whoever is messing with the timeline is not only affecting present situations with the Justice League and occurring members, but the whole Batman Beyond and future characters are also now feeling the wake of that. And I'm really interested to see how far they go with that because Saturn Girl clearly knows something. Nobody is acknowledging this. Everybody just thinks she's crazy. And I want to know what we're going to get out of her, but we just haven't gotten it back to her yet besides the small panels here and there.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully we still have another year left of DC Rebirth. It's a 2-year whole big event that they said when they first created it, when Jeff Johns first started the DC Rebirth. So we still have a whole nother year of mysteries left to be solved. One thing I will say is nice to see from DC is they're not oversaturating the market with events like Marvel does right now. It's just been they take their time with their events. There's a lot more crossovers, but I think since the start there's only been one, which was Justice League versus Suicide Squad, which even that was kind of small and condensed and focused within just the Justice League's universe. So
And was
it's nice to see that we're not constantly, oh, you got to pick up this book and this book and this book and this book. No, it's still kind of pick up what you want, and every now and then they'll have an event, and most of the stories are contained within the actual event, so you're not picking up all these different crossovers.
and even with the crossovers, they're kind of tastefully done. Like they're not in your face too bad. Like with the Justice League versus Suicide Squad, or that whole shenanigans. It was about the Eclipso Diamond, and Maxwell Lord was in it, and that whole shindig, and that was actually really interesting because we got to see the original Suicide Squad, which had like Rustum on it, and Maxwell Lord, Dr. Polaris, a couple others, and that was just interesting to learn more backstory into like that whole little bit with Amanda Waller, even though the Suicide Squad isn't playing a drastic part in the events of the world. It's still interesting to see what's going on with them to a certain degree. Like in the new stuff, I don't know if you know, but Zod is made a member, and immediately after cuts the brain bomb out of his head with laser beams, and that was pretty interesting to
I,
watch.
I thought that was yeah, he shot lasers right into the middle of his forehead. That was very unorthodox, but I think for overall, that's pretty much it. That's basically our DC Rebirth year roundup. Like always, if you guys have any questions, comments, anything we missed, any theories for future DC Rebirth, be sure to let us know down in the comments below. And you know what? If you're feeling up for it, give us a subscribe, give us a like. We appreciate it. If you didn't like it, do it anyway. It's not going to cost you anything.
Besides that, Matt, like just wrapping it all up, is there one comic in particular that you'd recommend? Like one out of everything that you've read that you've had like high hopes for, and it's kind of maintained that.
Yeah, you know what? The one comic it's kind of a shocker to me myself personally, but I really am enjoying the Deathstroke comic. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to keep up with it on the Weird Future channel, but personally, I think it's fantastic. Priest does a magnificent job with like the little short stories that all kind of come together in one large story, and just how he portrays Slade Wilson, Deathstroke, as such an asshole is fantastic. And I recommend if you guys aren't reading it, go pick it up. You might actually really enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And if I had to recommend one that I just had a good time enjoying, it might have been either All Star Batman with Batman transferring Harvey Dent, Two Face, to a prison across the United States, and everybody is against him, and it's kind of like a road trip kind of vibe, which is really funny. Or if not that one, then maybe any of the Green Lantern stuff. Honestly, Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps has honestly failed to disappoint. So I think that's about it, though, guys. I think that covers about everything in the Rebirth revelation.
Yes, 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 sir. All right. So once again, guys, thank you for watching. I'm Matt K,
And I'm the Cube.
and we'll see you guys next time.